Good afternoon, folks. It is the Sunday sermon here at the Philosophy for Philistines channel, where I'll never do things like ask you for money, but I will ask you for your time and your patience, because we don't have much time left. I'm going to pick up on the theme of that I had been developing earlier in the week on the Hegelian Dialectic, which is a tool which manipulates us into a frenzied circular pattern of thought and action. Each time we fight or defend against an ideology, we are playing a necessary role in Marx and Engels' grand design to advance humanity into a dictatorship of the proletariat. The synthetic Hegelian solution to all these conflicts can't be introduced unless all of us take a side that will advance the agenda. The Marxist global agenda is moving along at breakneck speed. The only way to completely stop the privacy invasions, expanding domestic police powers, land grabs, insane wars against inanimate objects, including transient verbs, covert actions, and outright assaults on individual liberty, is to step outside the dialectic. This releases us from the limitations of controlled and guided thought. So this is how the dialectic works. You need an agenda. Let's say it's shut down alternative media. Create a thesis. Fake news is causing a public outcry. Antithesis. Online Big Brother censorship, which we've seen just this past week. And synthesis. Removal of free speech on the web. When you take either side of the thesis versus the antithesis, you're missing the point. And if you see the point, you'd never take a side again. It's like seeing your mother naked in the kitchen with her boobs in the porridge. You can't unsee it. We are being controlled to one end: the removal of all civil liberties. Now, obviously, and this is my opinion, the witless Prime Minister of Canada and his incompetent cabinet aren't capable of anything. They're not even capable of being consistent in the things they say and do. All they can do is virtue signal. So you know that they're not the brains behind the game. Right now, we're seeing a shift in global hegemony from a US-led global hegemony to a communist Chinese-led global hegemony. I don't think any of us are going to wish to wake up in a hegemony controlled by the CCP. I've been a big fan of Watchman Nee, who was a very famous preacher in the 20s and 30s, particularly at that time, up until the communist takeover when he was jailed in China. And he wasn't released until sometime in the 1970s when he was dying of tuberculosis. And none of the brethren saw him after his release from prison. I was a fan of the translation of his sermons that were compiled by a chap by the name of Stephen Kong, who had come to the States in the 1950s and resided in Richmond and had a publishing house there. But the house churches in China undergo brutal persecution. The Uyghurs, who are the Muslim group in, I believe, Mongolia, have been used as platforms for organ harvesting. The Falun Gong, who have founded Epoch Times, the media outlet that Onasiri and I subscribe to, have been brutally persecuted as well by the CCP. I've traveled all over China. I was there in 2009 with the mayor from St. Catharines and my cousin. And we left Shanghai, flew into Shanghai, left there and flew out to Chengdu, drove north to Diyang, which is the area where the earthquake hit several years ago. I visited plants and factories there and met with business leaders, including the vice mayor of Diyang from the Communist Party, then flew back east to Hefei, where we were invited to be the first group of round eyes to get into the Communist Party's economic development headquarters in Hefei. And from Hefei, we took a high-speed train to Wuxi and then drove back south to Shanghai. Throughout this time, we met the wealthy oligarchs that run that place. And believe you me, they all screw one another over as soon as look at one another, let alone worry about how they're affecting the West. In fact, everything they do, every attempt to do business with us, is simply an attempt to take over and control. We mustn't play either game, either thesis or antithesis. We are not one another's enemies. We need to wake up and see what the real enemy is and who has designed this game. This game was designed in the 1800s as a well-known way to divide and conquer. And now I'm talking to people every week who are afraid to post their opinions anymore. There's no longer any intelligent discussion. They're being shunned and rejected by their own children. We've seen this in this own household. We live in a time of the greatest division there has ever been, which is right now why the DNC has surrounded Washington, D.C. with troops. Why would they be so afraid of Trump since they defeated him? None of it makes any sense. It's one of those things that when you take the blinders off your eyes and you see it, it can't be unseen. There are certain things that just can't be unseen once they've been seen. You need to understand, I beg you to understand, that they're using us as a pawn in their game to take away our civil liberties and all our rights that are protected by limited constitutional government. Part of the problem is, I believe, that people who tend to be of the right persuasion believe in equality before the law and see each individual as being very different from another individual, which is why individual rights are important to them. While people of the left tend to think that other people are just like they are, which is an enormous mistake to make. I suppose I was thinking something similar when I moved to Norway in the late fall of 2012, and I found out that was just absolutely incorrect. I encountered folk that were very, very different from myself and from my peculiar friends, who are also very, very different from one another. In Norway, there's a juju that everyone shares. They all have the same mojo. And in certain cases, I almost wondered if, when you had met one, you had met them all. Which is certainly an aspect, I believe, in my opinion, of socialist life. That socialists tend to share, They almost share the same personality. It seems Borg-like to me. But that's not the point I'm trying to make. If we stop talking across the great divide between left and right, we are never going to be able to resolve this crisis. As a classical liberal, I would be, I suppose, content if I saw that my friends who support socialism and all its programs that it wishes to pay for were interested in making sure that those programs were delivered effectively and at cost and were actually meeting the needs of the consumer, who is the taxpayer. But in order for us to see these things happen, in order for us to create a system of governance where there will be sufficient civil liberties to satisfy all, and certainly where freedom of speech can prevail so that we can discuss the critical issues at hand that will face us, that faced our ancestors, and that are going to face our children. Without the ability to speak, we can't think, and we're never going to arrive at equitable solutions. Don't buy in to the Hegelian dialectic. I'm posting links below. There's some photographs in it about warnings from what happens as a result of the dictatorship of the proletariat by Edmund Burke, the famous conservative philosopher. And I wish you a very wonderful Sunday, and I hope you're going to think about these things, because it's not Bill Gates. He's just a shill of China, this virus and the vaccine. He's in their pay. The DNC is in their pay. George Soros is controlling the financial network, also being made wealthy by the CCP, Communist China. They own half of Vancouver. They're buying gold mines up north in Canada. We are losing our autonomy little by little. I don't care what political stripe you're of. We need to have our own unique individual sovereignty. And you need to understand that in China, workers have no rights. I know. I've been inside their factories, and I've seen how they're treated. I'm not an alt-right nutbar. I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I don't think the world is flat. I'm not looking for the Antichrist, because I think I know who he already was. He had to be someone who would assume the place of Christ to an apostate church, but I'm not going to offend anybody by telling you my old Protestant opinion on that. I just want you to think and start discussing and quit being so touchy. And don't take the thesis and the antithesis argument and hammer back and forth by playing whack-a-mole with one another. Because that's exactly what those that are robbing us of our civil liberties want you to do. Have a great day. God bless you all.